Hello, everyone, and welcome to the AI Interconnect podcast, where we dive into the stories, strategies, and breakthrough shaping tomorrow's technology landscape. I'm your host, Lauren, and today I'm thrilled to welcome Steven Rea, founder of Chasing Tomorrow AI. And Steven has spent years revolutionizing multifamily property management with AI driven training, community building, and process optimization. Steven, great to have you on your show. And how are you today?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, and I'm excited to be here and see where we go. So happy to jump in wherever you
Fantastic.
want to start.
Exactly. It's going to be a great conversation. And let's start at the beginning, Stephen. Um, you have held leadership roles at RPM Living and Resprop before launching Chasing Tomorrow AI. What sparked your passion for transforming multifamily operation with AI?
Um, I think it started from just wanting to fix multifamily operations and trying to find the best solution possible and available to accomplish that. You mentioned I was at RPM Living in the very early, which now is one of the top five largest management companies in the world. And when it comes to managing apartments, we were not that when I worked there. We had less than 400 units compared to the 200 and something thousand they have today. Um, and I got to be on the ground floor of really building something where our focus was on quality and performance and holding ourselves to a really, really high standard in terms of what we delivered for everyone. I left that company after 8 years, and after doing some stuff on my own and coming back to the business, I realized not everyone had that same expectation and standard. And I also realized as companies grow, a company that I would have said was the very apex of property management across any property you wanted in our portfolio. When I left Roscoe at the end of 2016, or what became RPM Living at the end of 2016, um, in 2020, it was very easy to find properties that weren't meeting that standard within their portfolio. And that really got me thinking, like, why did this happen? And I'd heard similar stories about Greystar, who's now by far the largest. But Greystar in the 90s was a lot different company than Greystar today. And with size come a lot of inherent challenges that I don't think the industry's really responded to very well. Um, I got really frustrated seeing the kind of boots on the ground perspective of someone whose AC was out for weeks and was getting lost in the shuffle, or owners and investors who bought a property, but because they owned one or two properties, weren't getting the attention or the quality of management or leadership that a big fund who owns 30 or 40 properties might get, or who was building Class A properties or doing lease ups. Um, and the impact that had on the people who worked there, not just the residents. And at the end of 2023, I got really frustrated. Maybe skipped over a little bit. At my time at RPM Living, I was designing how we did things. So I built our software stack. I wrote all of our training. I had a big hand in architecting a lot of our processes and bonus programs and incentive structures, um, and really kind of found a passion for that, largely because um, what I love about real estate and specifically the apartment business is there's 1,000 ways to solve any problem. But if you give people 1,000 ways to solve a problem, it doesn't really scale and work very well for a business. Um, and finding the right way or the ideal way and the shortest way to get to that solution is always exciting for me. I guess I've always kind of liked puzzles. So having that background and um, really just feeling like the industry was letting everyone down. I was trying to maybe find a way to say it nicer, but the industry was failing in my mind and was horrendously broken. People who invested in properties weren't getting the returns they could be getting. Residents weren't getting the experience and the quality of management that they should be receiving. People who work in the industry weren't being supported, so they were quitting. The multifamily industry has a turnover rate of over 30% for the last 15 years. And in entry level jobs and maintenance jobs, it's closer to 40. When you're turning your entire employee base essentially every 3 years, that's not a way to build a business or a company. And I just felt like there had to be a way to do it better. So I'd been trying to do it better for a long time. And kind of bring it back to AI, I got kind of obsessed with ChatGPT when it first came out, then thought it was useless. It was a fun magic trick, but it was useless. But then came back to it every couple months because I saw people doing things with it that I thought were interesting, and decided that if it was useless to me, it was because I was the problem, not that the technology was the problem. And managed to stubborn my way into being able to prompt relatively working code, at least for an MVP perspective, maybe not production ready stuff. Although I may have thought it could have been production ready a year ago. I definitely don't have that illusion now. But really unlocked the ability for me to learn and explore new ideas and test things much quicker, and really develop a wider breadth of knowledge in terms of how things could be done, what's possible, bringing in some best practices when it comes to employee onboarding and training and support, or communicating with residents or supporting teams, and looking at what have other industries done that are more mature than property management, and how can we use AI to help adapt some of those ideas into what we do now. So it didn't start with AI, but it's definitely AI is the tool I leverage today to help do some of the things that candidly aren't new, right? They're just things that there wasn't necessarily time or the resources to do previously. That anyone who I'll give you an example. When a work order comes in for a resident in multifamily, you should probably go look at the work order history for that resident and see if it's come in again. That doesn't happen at most properties because most people are too busy and they're not paying attention and they're focused on other things taking priority. But and because 99% of the time you check it, it's nothing, right? So you're waiting for that 1%. But with AI or some other tools, frankly, you don't even really need AI for this specific example. You just need some smart programming. But in general, it can surface things that we know we should do, but we don't necessarily take the time to do. And it can surface things on an exception-only basis, as opposed to having to go look through a bunch of data to find the needle in the haystack. It just gives you needles. And that really kind of reframed my way of thinking about what's possible, and thinking about what's going to define property management, specifically multifamily, but property management in general over the next 20 years. And as I learned more about AI, I realized that the existing players in the software market are really, really ill-equipped within their existing architecture and infrastructure to use AI well. And to me, that creates an opening in the market for someone to come in and do something that's AI native, and be thinking, but also be thinking through the lens of someone who's operated and successfully turned around dozens of properties, more than dozens, hundreds of properties. It just felt like a risk I wanted to take and I had to take, right? Like if no one else was doing it and sitting in a lot of prop tech pitches of the next point solution that solves a silly problem that's not really a problem, it's just a symptom of an underlying issue, that's what sparked it. So that was a really long answer to what was a pretty simple question, but you asked from the beginning, so there was a little bit more to go through.
No, I really appreciate. I love that. That's my way of asking question. I don't ask the question. I let you talk, and it was very very clear. Basically, that was. I mean, you mentioned particular incident or maybe frustration into a training session or tech rollout that made you realize that the static quo was not working, and and then you come up with chasing tomorrow. Then
Yeah, I would maybe add one thing to that is, I stepped away from the business in 2016 for a couple of years, and the company I was at, RPM, we really had one software. Like we used Yardi for everything. And we didn't have a separate CMS, or separate CRM. And we didn't have a separate internet company or website company. We weren't using ILSs extensively. And we didn't have this crazy tech stack that was 10, 15, 20 different softwares. And when I came back in 2020, I was kind of dumbfounded, honestly, that we use so many point solutions and we wanted best in everything. I'll tell you that anyone who works in property management, with what we do, we don't need the best CRM. We're not doing drip campaigns. We're not doing cold outreach. Every lead we have is a warm lead, period. So the way you interact with a warm lead is very different than you interact with a cold lead, which is what CRMs are typically built for, is at least a lot of the advanced tech. I don't need that. I don't need the best procurement software in the world. I'm not Nike or Samsung trying to source materials across multiple countries and multiple things, right? Like, we have a very small subset of suppliers, right, who provide the things that we need, and then there's local options. We don't need the best procurement platform in the world. We don't need to use Coupa, even though Coupa is really impressive, and I like Coupa. I've used Coupa, but Coupa's overkill. That takes specialists to use that software, and we're in an industry of generalists. And that lack of recognition just bubbled over between 2020 and 2023 of just being like, am I the only sane person in the room? Am I the only person that recognizes that we continue to introduce more and more complication to what's already a very challenging and complex job? And that what we really need to be doing is stripping things away, not layering more stuff in. And Chasing Tomorrow, for me, really started as it continues to be an umbrella for me to explore ideas on how to fix this. Because it is a very complex problem that's been made extremely complicated by our overwhelming tech stack. And AI represents a great way to not only build something that replaces a large number of those things, but also for the situations where you can't replace it, can function as an intermediary to make it to where you're not having to log into 6 different things. You're not having to look at dashboards that are silly, that don't give you any actionable information, and that give you 25 things to click on, and then you've never really been trained well, and you're expected to make a strategic decision on which of the 25 things you should click on next, right? But you have no context with which to do that. You just follow the checklist you've been given, and if anything veers outside that checklist, your brain melts and you quit. And that's just what I saw everywhere. And I felt like the only sane person in the room, which I'm not, right? There's a lot of other people who see this too. But I was definitely in the very small minority, and that was the flashpoint of me saying this has to be done better. And I can't function in an organization that doesn't recognize these problems and isn't actively trying to fix them. And so I either needed to start a management company or start a tech company. And having built 2 management companies from very small to not small anymore, and knowing what that was like, I figured I'll just give tech a try. I can maybe that'll be easier than building a management company, which it's not. It's just different. And but for me, that's what makes it fun. So we're experimenting a lot, and we've got a bunch of different kind of small balls in the air where we're prototyping and testing and trying to find things that fit and resonate. And I think of us right now, we're kind of an MVP company more so than an actual software or product company. But that's where it starts, and it's been a great way for me to learn a lot more. And then it's been interesting kind of adapting principles of things like agile. I don't love the scrum elements of it necessarily, but I like the adaptability and short-term goals and that sort of thing that comes with it. So I'm learning a lot of things that I'm able to kind of pattern match and bring back to where my core expertise is in property management.
Yeah, I mean, everything makes a lot of sense, and you're explaining very well. And yeah, fast forward to Chasing Tomorrow AI. In, I mean, you mentioned it a little bit, but I like to repeat in your own words. What core problem are you solving for multifamily teams today?
For Chasing Tomorrow, the core problem I'm solving is improving the outcomes and performance for all the stakeholders in the industry and experience. That's the goal, if you want to say. That's the mission. That's which sounds very broad, but I feel like I've actually been able to narrow the root causes of those down to a handful of things. One of them, I think, is the software stack. I think it's overwhelming. I think people are only taught how to use the software. They're no longer taught how to run a property as a byproduct of that. And a lot of times they also feel like the software training they receive is insufficient. I would maybe counter that by saying the context that they're given for how to use the software is insufficient. So when they encounter things that exist as edge cases or things that they weren't expecting to happen, they don't know what to do. And that's not necessarily a lack of knowing how to use the software. That's a lack of knowing how to apply the use of the software in your actual job. And I think that core issue is endemic. It's across the industry. It's everywhere. It's very rare to meet a regional manager who understands that the owner of the property is their customer, how that customer plans on actually making money. They think their job is occupancy, where their job is actually net operating income. So a lot of what we do is education. We have a professional community that we're slowly building up that's going to provide courses in education to provide kind of a broader lens on what it is we actually do, the business of multifamily, I guess you could say. And then on the technology side, I'm starting with training and trying to build tools to allow companies and organizations to build better content that's more engaging for their specific tech stack, that takes away the time necessary to teach people how to use the software. Ideally, then giving that time back to that organization to be able to teach people how to run a property, which is sorely missing. And then that's our first foray in. We've got a data product we're working on. We've got and then a couple like specific multifamily tools, like a move out inspection tool and a handful of other things that, as I mentioned, are really kind of MVPs or prototypes in development to just see what's possible. And with technology moving so fast, what's possible seems to be changing fairly quickly. But we're doing our best to try and skate to where the puck is going, as opposed to where it is. And focus on building things that drive real business results and aren't just addressing the shiny, fluffy thing. I'll give you an example of that. To me, a leasing AI in multifamily is a shiny, fluffy thing. They're not very good. I know all the arguments of like it catches missed calls, or like, what if someone wants to look at the apartment at 1 a.m. And I'll tell you, that person looking at 1 a.m. has zero expectation of someone responding to them at 1 a.m. Right? Like there's like we're losing some common sense here in terms of what people like. We're trying to solve for all these edge cases that are so improbable that we've built the system to manage it and all these different layers of tech, where if we just actually had the simple thing we need, we wouldn't miss as many phone calls. We wouldn't have all this stuff necessarily happen if we weren't distracting people with all these things that don't matter. And so it's really, that's kind of the root of the long-term vision, is like, let's just build something that's bespoke for property management, that's built with today in mind, that and that solves real problems, and that ultimately you can point to an increase in NOI, or you can point to an increase in performance or employee satisfaction from the use of these tools, which, if you look at any employee surveys, the existing tool set does not provide. Employees do not feel like they're, a large percentage of employees do not feel like the software we use makes it better. Swift Bunny did a survey on that last year, and it was overwhelming. The tech is part of the problem, not part of the solution, or at least the way it's implemented. I'll clarify. It's implemented poorly and usually done. I like the analogy of a Swiss watch when I talk about this. If I had a Rolex or a Patek, and I opened up the back and I was like, you know what, I have a gear that's going to go in here better, and I like 3D print my own gear to go in the watch, and then all of a sudden that I look up a few days later and that watch isn't keeping time. I'm like, well, why? Well, because you had a very intricate system that you thought you could just plug something new in and not have it cascade into every other aspect of that system. And that seems to be how technology is adopted, not exclusively in prop tech. Like I see this everywhere, but it's the industry I know and that I love and that I spend so much time in multifamily management. It is it's everywhere, and then we refuse to remove things because we as an industry, when we're adopting tech, we do a very poor job of identifying goals, objectives, what will make this implementation successful, what would deem this as a failure and something that we should walk back. And that like exit strategy is something that I don't see considered very often, and that I would encourage anyone to consider. Right, like if you're adopting new tech, you need to have a way that like, hey, one, have a good pilot for it, but then even after a full rollout, and you look up in 3 months and it's not doing the thing you thought it would do, you need to be able to say like, hey, we screwed up, and I'm getting rid of this software. Because what ends up happening is it just gets left and people start working around it, and then you just have like the equivalent of technical debt, in your tech stack as a company. So anyway, that's
No. I love it. No, it's cool, and you you have branded your training platform as guided, and your community as a cycle. How did those names and that ecosystem concept come about?
I wish there was some like genius formula behind it, but you know, so Guided is a content creation tool that, frankly, a lot of my competition who build similar products, like Scribe, would be one that people are very familiar with, or Loom. We're kind of like if Scribe and Loom and Story Lane had a baby, and it inherited all of their powers. But I was just talking it out with someone and said, you know, they were like, what does the software do? And I said, well, we guide people through how to use software. We guide them through the things they need. And I used the word guide like 100 times and was like, oh, okay, there's the name. We'll call it Guided. And then my marketing brain turned on, and there's like, because there's a period at the end of it. So it's guided dot, right? And the dot kind of in a way represents like anything could come after it. So it's like guided dot anything, guided tours, guided walkthroughs, guided training, guided onboarding. So that was guided. Circle's an idea, which was, education and low cost and free education for people in the property management industry, teaching all the things I learned from mentors and, experience that have been transformational to my career, that I didn't see being taught anywhere. Not like programmatically, intentionally, like with good course structure and good tools for retention. And then I also didn't feel like there was a good place for people to feel comfortable asking questions. That's not their boss, because sometimes you don't want to go to your boss for whatever reason. A lot of times that's pride and ego, but in general, right, whatever the reason. So I wanted to create a community for that. I had this idea in 2018, 2019 initially, before I came back to the operations side of the business. And it was going to be called Busy, largely because I was annoyed at going to industry events and asking people how they were doing, and they all said busy. I was like, that's such like a cop-out answer. We're all busy. Like, busy doing what? Like, use real words. But then I realized that was just an inside joke for myself. It didn't really make sense as a brand. And Circle just, it's it just invites a mental picture of like group and inclusivity and like open to anyone. And I think that was part of what drove it. And then again, my marketing brain kicked in a little bit and was like, well, for the first people who signed up, there can be inner circles that are kind of groups and things within it, or people who take a paid course could get access to a private community. And so now you have inner circles, and I don't know, it just it fit. And then one thing I've learned about names is not to overthink them. I had a company years ago. I spent months I ran short-term rentals, and I think we landed on a great name. It was Elevate, but it was alphanumeric. It was ELEV8. We ran all the rental homes that Airbnbs people hate because they're big houses in nice neighborhoods, and we slept 20 and made a bunch of money. But that name, I spent a good like 4 months like painstakingly going over, and it was one of the first ones I came up with, and I didn't love it at the time. And someone pointed out to me, like, what's Google? Like, what are like we're recording on Riverside. Why is Riverside the name for a online like recording platform? And or what is Nike, right? Like, I guess there's a little bit of Greek mythology kind of thing, but you get the idea, right? Like, Apple, like, why is the name like, I call it orange? It has nothing to do with the name. It's what does the name represent, and what the name represents is something that's built in time. So I didn't want to get stuck there for very long. So like the first thing that my brain had like a little bit of a marketing like resonance with in both instances, I was like, I'm sticking with these. I can always change them, right? Like we don't have enough brand equity yet that it would be like tragic to change them. But yeah, I mean, there's no rocket science to it at all. It was just throwing stuff at the wall for 20 minutes and figuring out what stuck.
Yeah. No, but I mean, they're great names. And okay, let's zoom out to the broader industry. What big trend in AI-driven property management are you seeing for 2025 and beyond?
I think comfort is probably is one of the bigger trends. More and more people are using it. It's getting more useful, which is bringing more and more people into it. I do notice a lot of people who are who tried it in 2023 or middle of last year and were like, oh, it's not that good, and haven't really revisited with modern tools. Um, and I've kind of been trying to stay at the tip of that wave intentionally this whole time. So I spend way too much money on AI licenses. Like I think I've got all of them, including the $200 versions of a couple. Just to continue. I mean, I like having O3 Pro, and Claude 4 is really good. And I did not like getting. I seem to hit my limit like every 30 minutes with Claude, and it like shuts me down for 6 hours. And I like using the web portal as opposed to like trying to build some. I could honestly use cursor and prompt UI pretty quickly if I wanted to, but that also takes time and mental cycles, and I don't need that right now. The stuff I'm doing, I'm fine with, especially with projects that they've all implemented now in terms of keeping things organized and having separate system prompts already built in. So anyway, yes, the trends. Comfort's a big one, but I don't think comfort's one of those. I think of it as like a spectrum, right, where people weren't comfortable, didn't want to use it. The analogy I like that I've heard people use is it's like the internet, right? Like when Amazon first came out, like who's going to buy things online? Who's going to put their credit card into the internet? God, like these crazy people. Can you believe that Susie and Bob buy things online? And now like everyone buys things online, right? It's just become normal. And I think AI is in that same trajectory. We're not in the like, don't put your credit card in the internet phase. We're a little past that, but we're not in the understanding it deeply enough, as an industry and kind of as a society to really start thinking about how best to use it. We're still trying to apply it to the way things have been done, as opposed to allowing it to dictate how things could be done. I've been looking everywhere for I saw a Steve Jobs clip a year and a half ago, and I have not been able to re-find it, which makes me think I may have dreamt it. But even if I dreamt it, I love the quote, so then I'll take credit for it if it's not real. But I'm pretty sure it was him. He said, with any big technology shift, and at the time he was talking about the personal computer, this was from like the late 80s or early 90s ish. But he said we have a habit as humans of trying to take this new technology and adapt it to the patterns of how things are currently being done. And we're trying to fit like square pegs in round holes. But then what happens is, and where the opportunity exists for entrepreneurs and people, is to recognize that we don't need to adapt this new technology to the way we used to do things. We need to understand this new technology deeply enough to then allow it to dictate a new way of doing things, because we have a deep understanding of what's possible. And I don't think there are very many people who have a deep understanding of what's possible, who also have a deep understanding of the needs of an industry where you're going to be building enterprise products. I think a lot of the people building tools and products are technical people, and who understand neural networks and understand ML and understand the NLP and the different types of AI that exist, but they don't have a deep enough understanding of what it is that's actually done in the industry to build things that are truly useful. And as humans, we tend to think we know what we want or what we need, and often do not at all. I'll go back to the leasing agent example, right? Like using AI to lease, that's your sales pipeline, like that's your revenue stream. And the argument is, well, they're not very good anyway. And I would respond to the people. I mean, so the people aren't very good anyway, but might as well just replace them with computers. My response to that is make the people better. Like, like stop abdicating your need to like develop your staff. And because your staff is bad, that's your fault. That's not their fault. That's your fault as an employer. If you have bad staff, fire them or replace them and make them better. Like that is your job. And to say, well, they're not very good, so I'm going to put not very good software in place, is just crazy to me. But that's like what people like. What do you need? I need better leasing. So instead of making my team better, I want software that does it automatically, and then I can cut payroll and save money. Well, that's not actually what you need. What you need is things that drive revenue growth and that drive NOI and that allow your property to perform better. And you've diagnosed it to this one thing that's not actually the thing. And until we get a little bit further down the road, there's not a broad awareness of what actually creates value. So there's comfort, but there's not a lot of practical application yet. Everyone's still just playing with toys. And there's not a lot of places I see AI being used that get me really excited. And that's probably just because, again, it's early. I think more in long term, you're going to see, agentic architectures in terms of software, where like most of the software stack, like within a program, and what you've built is actually agents that are interacting with each other, making tool calls and passing data back and forth, and picking up some of those human aspects and making it to where improving your software can happen not by writing better code or making it more optimized, but by having a model improvement, either from a frontier model or by fine tuning your own model, or prompt improvements. And that's what's going to drive a lot of the improvement in software performance, more so than being able to, maybe not more so, but I'll correct myself there before I say something really silly. But at least like nearing the level of being able to write cleaner software and better algorithms and all that sort of thing, in terms of how the software actually performs, because we'll be asking it to do more. And you'll be asking it to do things that aren't necessarily deterministic, where you're asking it to give you 2 or 3 like options or plans to review, and that takes an ecosystem of tools that we're just now on the frontier of the very like edge of building with MCP servers and that sort of thing. And even then, those are API calls. And I go back to, actually, I heard someone talk about this recently, and sorry, but and this is very little to do with AI and my industry, but it was interesting to me. It was the Primogen, who's worked at Netflix and a full stack developer, and he has a podcast called The Stand Up that I've really enjoyed listening to recently, where it's all senior developers who kind of have a depth of knowledge in software development that I can't even comprehend. And they were recently talking about the challenges with APIs, because the web itself is just such a chaotic place where you're calling APIs that are getting updated and changed and all these things regularly that create all sorts of friction. And it's why software has to be maintained the way it does, is because it's tapping into this ecosystem of APIs that's not static, that's like constantly in flux and evolving. So your software has to evolve with it. And that really kind of reaffirmed my belief that there'll be two big winners, or maybe a couple, but there'll be two big like frameworks through which the next generation of software is approached. And that's the orchestration agent that sits between a bunch of point solutions. And I think this doesn't just apply to property management, but sits between a bunch of point solutions and navigates between them for you and is making a bunch of different API calls and it brings everything back and it becomes your portal through which you operate whatever you're operating, your business or whatever it is. But having heard how hard the upkeep is for that sort of thing long term, the alternative and the approach that I prefer instinctually is more the Apple approach, which is like we're gonna have everything under our umbrella, and AirPods aren't the best headphones in the world, right? Like Bose makes really good ones, Sony makes really good, like there's other great headphones out there, but AirPods are a bestseller because they're easy, they just work. You don't have to think about it, and I think that's the benefit of having everything in one. Like you're not going to make API calls to build your data lake or anything like that. It's just you have all the data, you have everything in one place, and how much that would simplify, or you have as much as possible in one place, maybe. But how that would simplify building useful AI tools, to me feels like it is part of why I think the big players in the property management software space, like Yardi and RealPage, especially RealPage, are exposed, is because their data architecture is so fractured. How do you run any sort of really high-end AI algorithmic processes or analysis on that when like the token cost or like the aggregation cost or the API latency, like it just feels like it would be a lot, at least to me as a somewhat layman. So I think that's one of the big challenges right now is, and why we're not getting the things that people that I think would be interesting is the underlying infrastructure I don't think necessarily exists yet.
Okay, I love all this. Let's move on to your business model. And your model blends SaaS, subscription, membership fees, and consulting retainers. How do you balance those revenue streams to scale sustainably?
I don't. Is the short answer. Like we have a great product with Guided that we are trying to push and scale from a SaaS standpoint. But it's an enterprise product, right? So, or at least that's who I'm targeting, right? I could make it consumer facing, but that's its own ball of worms that I don't feel like I have an expertise at. I have an expertise in property management. I know how this solves problems there, so I can tell those stories. The consulting really kind of manifested as a good vehicle to showcase the software. So a lot of the problems that people are asking me to solve, which is onboarding or training or just consistency in operations across an organization. How we keep making sure that people are doing the things that we want them to do, that they're following our SOPs, that they're following our guidelines on a regular basis. Building out that infrastructure well requires a tool like Guided. So it's a bit of a SaaS-enabled service model, at least right now. And then over time that'll evolve. That being said, the property management software implementation business, meaning consultants who help companies implement software from a software company, is millions and millions of dollars a year. If not, I don't know what the actual market cap is. I asked ChatGPT to try and calculate it years ago, and it came up with $1 billion a year, and that kind of hurt my brain, and I didn't think that was possible. But let's call it $100 million a year. because there's a lot of consultants out there. There's thousands of them who are gainfully employed and doing work. And this may just be me being naive, but if your software takes that much to implement, your software design or your UX or UI for that implementation feels like it probably sucks. And having done a bunch of those implementations, they do. So is that a design issue, right? Is that how much of that could also be solved with AI? And that's a lot of setup to say, like, I think as much as I don't want consulting to be a massive part of what's done for me personally long term, I feel like it's really important for software companies to recognize that the success of their customers comes from really good implementations and really good setups. And when you just farm that out to a third party, or who you aren't involved in the process really at all, or when you leave it to the customer, you're leaving room for things to not go as well as they could, which is going to impact churn, and it's going to impact the success of your company long term. Because what you want is customers who are sticky, and you can create stickiness a couple different ways. You can create stickiness by through ecosystem stickiness, which means like the cost of change is so great that most people don't want to deal with it, which is the approach of most prop tech companies today. Or you can make a product so good that people don't want to leave, and that switching to it is really easy, and painless, or as painless as it could be. And that's candidly part of why I started with a training software, because as I spin things forward and think about the other things I want to build, well, training employees how to use that and onboarding it and getting buy-in and customer success is going to be really, really important to the success of my company long term. And the only way to do that is to do it yourself, or like not me personally, right? But like do it as an organization. So I think the consulting piece will always be. It may not be called consulting, it may be called implementations, it may be called other things down the road. But I personally think more software companies, and it's actually interesting to me, a lot of the tech CEOs I know and I'm friends with and talk to, and I mention this too, they say, oh God, no. Like, we're in the software business. Like, we're SaaS revenue. We don't want to do implementations. Like, we're not, that's for the customer or for consultants. And I just think about like, how many customers does that lose you? Because they think your product sucks when they just didn't implement it well. And to me, they feel like they're like hand in glove. You have to do both really well. And frankly, I think because so few do it, that's also a huge opportunity to differentiate yourself and just say, we're going to own this process for you. You don't have to worry. We're going to build it. We're going to do it. We're going to execute it. And that's how I handle my consulting now. You know, I'm working with a company right now that's transitioning from Entrada to RealPage and building support and training content for them to support that transition, but then also providing some advice and feedback on like employee buy-in and change management, and hey, we should run a contest for this thing because this is going to be extra work for your team initially, or being really plugged into a feedback loop of saying like, oh, they're struggling with this, you know, they're struggling with how to do resident transfers, they're struggling with how to run applications. I know we didn't have those in our initial plan, but let's move those up to the top of the list. And unless you're engaged as a company and organization and understanding what the real problems are being experienced by people in this process, as opposed to farming it out to a third party, you never hear back where the actual challenges are. So then you can't adapt and you can't get better, and and you end up mediocre. And I don't do anything to be mediocre. And if I have to carry more overhead as an organization, to do implementations and do them extraordinarily well for my customers, then I'm going to do that. And I'm going to have faith I'm going to make it up on the back end. Because while, you know, some softwares may churn at or get bad reviews at like 60 or 70%, I want 90% retention, which is, I've heard, is crazy for a software company, but I don't. So averages are just averages, right? Like I don't try to do anything to be average. So
I love it. That's beautiful. Looking ahead, where do you see chasing Tomorrow AI in 3 years? Any exciting partnership, or maybe, or or product launch on the horizon?
So in 3 years,
It's too far.
I'm trying to think about like how best to phrase this. I'll give it away. Even if someone else runs and does this before me, I think it'll be good for the industry. Within 3 years, I think I will have gone scorched earth on the data market. As I mentioned, I'm working on building a data product to capture properties that are for sale, daily rental rates, availability on apartment communities, eventually across the country. Because the ability to capture that data has gotten incredibly simple. If you have OpenAI Operator, you can ask it to go do it for you, and it will do it and do it well if you have a good prompt. So when data companies in the property management space are charging hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, if you look at like CoStar, right? CoStar is $1,000 a user a month, roughly. For data that's static and a really poor UX and it gets updated based on their apartments.com feeds, which they also charge you for, by the way, which I always thought was ridiculous. You're charging me for my data to sell me my data. It just drove me insane. But because the ability to capture all of that data is becoming more and more widespread and easy, especially with the improvements in OCR and some other things, I think the data market is essentially going to go to almost zero. Having a data set and building interesting and useful things on top of it is going to have an inherently large value. Having a data set for something like what we do, where honestly, I think historical trends are somewhat misleading. I think that data skews things because, and maybe it's just because I grew up in Austin, which is a city that's completely transformed itself like 3 or 4 times in my lifetime. What happened 5 years ago is completely irrelevant to what's going to happen today. I don't care what happened 5 years ago, right? Like I want to know what happened 5 months ago, and I want to know what's going to happen 5 months from now, and that's where I'm making my decisions. So I think that big historical corpus of data, it has less and less value as time goes on, once you start collecting it. So we're going to start we're starting to collect the data soon. We'll productize that in a couple months. In a handful of different ways. So in 3 years, I would expect my data market to have gone scorched earth on the market. I would like to charge an order of magnitude less than everyone else in the business, because I just have to subsidize the cost of my capture. I don't need to make money on that because ultimately that's infrastructure for the things I want to build. And then hopefully we would be working internally on the MVP of what I would hope evolves into a comprehensive property management software platform, and to compete with the Yardis and Real Pages and Tradas and Appfolios of the world. I have that I won't spoil. I have some kind of interesting ideas on how that could be structured, and just from a UI UX perspective that I think would drive performance in a really profound way, that I don't see a lot of people talking about or trying to do. So, and ultimately, like that product's probably going to take 5 to 7 years to build. But I think we can get an MVP out that's that helps and solves some problems, and ultimately is like the groundwork for what's coming.
Okay, love it. Any international expansion?
I mean, not in 3 to 5 years. I think that would be, as much as that would be amazing, and it could happen, right? But I just don't. It's hard for me with some of this stuff. One, because I'm a dreamer, like inherently, like I'm a crazy idea person, and I'm really good at step 1 and 2, and I'm really good at steps 9 and 10. It's steps 3 through 8 that because my brain is always on like, okay, I understand this well enough. Let me go to the next idea. So it takes a lot of discipline for me to stay grounded. To the point that I actually don't do a lot of long-term planning anymore. Because it felt silly. Like I was just teasing myself sometimes. Like, let me do a 2-year plan, and like, what are my numbers going to be, and what's going to happen, and it's all irrelevant, right? Like it's like I need to get through the next 30 days, and I need to get through the next 30 days, and I have a North Star of where I want to go. I mean, obviously with some of the stuff I mentioned. Um, and but at the same time, like that's all I need, right? Like I just need to know directionally where I'm going to go because I can't, I don't know the problems I'm going to have to solve and overcome. I don't know how people are actually going to use the software. I'll say with guided, I thought the interactive demos were going to be the most popular thing in terms of use case, right? Like making something that people can click through. And it turns out it's a step-by-step guides like Scribe. I thought it was going to be this other element or the videos, and it's like, no, it's the guides that people, are really deriving a lot of value for my customer base. I wouldn't have anticipated that. So I think it's better just to keep your eyes on what's in front of you. And I want to have a good July, and I want to have a good rest of the summer. And I'm trying to get some space to where I can hire some more people, and start to grow. But planning for growth or expansion when I've got a lot of I've just got a lot of foundational work to do. Maybe if we catch up in 6 months or a year, I might have a different perspective. I might say that's going to be impossible, or I might say, yeah, like we're growing a lot faster than we thought, or people found us organically. Because frankly, guided is it's an industry agnostic product, right? So if someone's looking for a better way to train their teams on how to use software, and onboard their employees, it's a great tool to create those resources. So there's a chance that it picks up some virality and outside of the niche that I can directly speak to, which would be amazing. But I'm definitely not counting on it.
I love it, Steven. This is great. This is amazing. This amount of information and this has been fantastic, insightful, concrete, forward thinking, and thank you so much for sharing your story and
Well, I appreciate it,
expertise.
and thank you again for inviting me on. No, I definitely appreciate it, and yeah, I get going downhill sometimes, and then it just goes. So
no, but maybe we do another episode in 6 to 8 months from now, and it would be a lot of moving parts, different, and
yeah, definitely, I'd definitely be up for that.
yeah, fantastic. And to our listeners, if if you're in a property management or just love seeing AI in action, definitely check out Chasing Tomorrow AI and connect with you, Steven. But where can they connect?
Yeah, so Steven at chasingtomorrow.ai. Our website is chasingtomorrow.ai, which is in the process of being revamped. So that'll be updated soon. And then I'm on LinkedIn, and I kind of drift in and out on LinkedIn. I might be posting every day for a little while, and then real work happens and you kind of drift away from it. And but you definitely find me on LinkedIn as well.
Fantastic, Steven. I I love it. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Laurent. I really enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.
Great. And that's it for today's episode of AI Interconnect. And if you enjoyed it, share it with someone who is building the future, or better yet, someone who should be. And until next time, stay curious, stay creative, and keep building. Thank you.